Welcome to the PA Books podcast. PA Books is a production of PCN, the Pennsylvania Cable Network. This program features interviews with authors of books on Pennsylvania people, history, sports, business, nature, and politics. While the focus is always on Pennsylvania, topics like the Revolutionary War, the Battle of Gettysburg, the Industrial Revolution, the coal and steel industries, and authors like John Updike, David McCullough, and John Grogan have a universal appeal. We hope you enjoy this podcast.
This week on PA Books, the author of Semisweet, John O Brien.
John O Brien, author of Semisweet, An Orphan's Journey Through the School That Hershey Built. For people who are not familiar with it, can you explain what the Milton Hershey School is?
Sure, but that requires reading the book in part. But yeah, it's the most remarkable school on earth, in my view, starting with the fact that it serves 2,000 of the neediest kids in the U.S., as their home 365 year-round, and it has over a $12 billion endowment. That's with a B, and that puts it up there with most of the Ivies and universities with the biggest. And that the school owns the Hershey Chocolate Company, not the other way around.
How'd that come to be?
Well, because my book's about two things, both Milton Hershey the school, but Milton Hershey the man. And he was one of the most incredibly generous people and one of the finest philanthropists ever to walk the earth, in my view. And to give you an idea of that, he gave his fortune away to the orphan boys. They were all white males at the time, to his orphan boys in 1918. Having started the school in 2009, he then gives his entire fortune of $60 million to the orphan kids a full 27 years before he dies. So it's not like a deathbed philanthropist. Most are, right? They're wondering what to do with their money when they see the end zone. But he decides to do that, and then the humility of the guy. He doesn't even mention it to anyone. It's 5 years later that somehow the New York Times picks it up, that Milton Hershey has done this for his boys.
Is the candy company run any different because it's owned by this school?
Not so much. They work hard because it still is a publicly traded company. The school owns it in the sense that it has about 70% of the voting share and about a third of the equity. But they go out of their way, the managers, to make sure that the Hershey Company gets run by its own separate board.
Now, for people who are not familiar with it, where is Hershey, Pennsylvania?
Hershey's just east of Harrisburg by 8 miles. It's kind of, it's probably an hour and a half north of Philadelphia. And it's in one of the most beautiful little valleys in that very rich and fertile central Pennsylvania area.
So why'd you write your book?
Gosh, I had to, Brian. I mean, I spent 65 years of my life connected closely to the Milton Hershey School, starting as a 3-year-old orphan myself, and then getting this incredible opportunity by some miracle to come back almost 55 years later to become its president. And so this is an in-between. I played all kinds of roles that are described in the book as well. So it's a full circle journey, and this is my home, as it is for most of the kids who spent at least a good part of their childhood there. And this is a book that I had to get off my heart, for one thing, as my wife says, but that I also want the entire world to know about this remarkable school that serves kids in a way nobody else can.
How many students go there?
We're right around the 2,000 mark now, which is the highest we've ever been. We're on, again, think of resources. We have 10,000 acres to work with, as well as the incredible endowment.
And you arrived at age 3?
Yeah, I was dropped off with my older brother Frankie, who was 5, when I was 3, kind of like abandoned like bags of soiled laundry is my first recollection. I don't have many at that age.
Did they just drop you off at the door, or was there an application program?
Well, there was an application, but we were just taken there, and our aunt had driven down with a friend, and we looked around, and suddenly she wasn't there.
Why were you taken there?
We had lost our parents tragically in what was told to us as a tragic car accident. In fact, it's something far more horrific than that. And maybe I'll leave that one for the book unless you ask about it.
So, as a 3-year-old, what did they do with you? I mean, what was life like? How did you settle in?
Well, it's a little bit like the old mother in a shoe. There were just boys pouring out everywhere. We had 32 cottage mates, if you will. It was in a big red cottage, biggest building I had ever seen in my life. I'd been born in Snowshoe, Pennsylvania, up in Center County. And the one thing the school knew how to do, a couple things. One is they knew how to feed you. We had terrific food from the start. But how to get the kids playing and working together. So they were always rolling out a ball or something for us to jump on and play. And then we had to do our chores. So from the very beginning, I remember by age 4, that I had chores. And we started developing a deep work ethic right then.
Was it all ages mixed together?
We were divided into 2 groups, and so there was the elementary school students. We were in cottages of about 30 or so kids per cottage. And then when you finished the 5th grade, you went out to the farm homes. And so Mr. Hershey was, I think, very wise in thinking about how do we get the older kids to burn off that energy. So we all went out to dairy farms. There were 40-some dairy farms. We were 15 to 20 kids per dairy farm. And you can guess that part of our chore every day, twice a day, was to milk those cows and to bring in all the other work. So if you think about the age split, though, from kindergarten or pre-K to 5th grade was a pretty nice grouping. But from 6th grade, from 10 years old up to maybe even 19 plus, that was a pretty rough gathering of kids.
Were there many 3-year-olds there?
Very few. Technically, you're supposed to be 4, and I turned 4 within weeks, I think, as I recall. And so there weren't even many 4-year-olds, but by the time you got to be 3rd grade, 4th grade, it started to fill up pretty good.
Did you have classes or schooling when you were 4?
Sure, yeah. So I was in the pre-kindergarten, and I had to repeat. So my guy
Did you flunk?
buddies teased me that I flunked, but I was just too young. And so I did another year of pre-K and then K and then on through, and spent my whole childhood there. Graduated from there 14 years later.
What was it like settling in?
Some parts were easy, especially the play. The hard part was the sense of abandonment. It was a really deep, kind of raw feel of not being wanted, of just being dropped off. And Frankie and I, fortunately, my brother, slept in little cots next to each other, and we would hold hands every night. It was our ritual, and cry quietly, because there was no crying allowed in this very macho institution.
You say in the book that there's 3 codes of behavior, and one is no crying.
Right.
And the other one is nobody talks about how they came to be at Milton Hershey School.
Right, that there was just no appetite for the stories, because everyone had a real victim story, and they all were pretty awful, and so I guess there was just an understanding we didn't want to hear about it.
What was the third one?
Third was no squealing.
Oh, no squealing.
No ratting. You couldn't, it was us against the authorities, whether that was the house parents, the principal, and so on. And so we had a kind of an omerta of everything stays here.
You talk about the bullying in there.
Mm-hmm.
Was that in the elementary school too, or was that till you?
Not so much until
the middle school.
When you went out on the kind of the rough and tumble farm homes with that big age split.
So you had 10-year-olds and 18-year-olds together.
Yeah, you did, and while there'd be teasing and stuff and little punching and things happened in elementary school, it wasn't until you got into the 6th grade with the high school seniors and juniors, we even were called the big guys and the little guys. And the big guys had all the power and control, and they would have the little guys do all their errands and chores for them and would rough them up if they didn't. And so it could be pretty tough.
What'd you learn from that?
Gosh, I learned I didn't want to be that way, for one thing. It took a horrible toll on my brother Frankie. Frankie was just a lot kinder, gentler, more tender kid than I was, much smarter too. And he didn't have the wherewithal to stand up for himself. And being my older brother, I was kind of looking to him for help and discovered that he needed more than I did.
And when you were, say, in 10 years old and up, what was a day like?
A day was hearing that awful alarm go off, like it would be at the firehouse.
Do you remember how early it was?
Oh yeah, that's around 5 to 5:15 at the latest every day.
That was when you were living at the farmhouse?
Yes, and then we would scamper, make our beds quickly, scamper to the barn room, okay, and go from our house clothes into the barn clothes and rush out to do the milking and all the cleanup before we'd even come in for breakfast. Change into house clothes, eat breakfast, change into school clothes, catch the bus up to the hill. Milton Hershey, the school then for the high school and junior high kids, sits up on the hill at the proudest perch in the valley.
That's one that overlooks the amusement park now?
Yes, yeah. That Mr. Hershey wanted the best perch in the valley for his boys. And then we'd have our routine classes, sports and music if you were smart enough to get on them. If you weren't, you had to come home and do the milking with fewer hands, right? So you can imagine how all of us wanted to be on a sports team and help make our athletic teams great.
You played sports?
I did. I loved sports. I came to it naturally. Again, a difference between my brother and I. I was fit, quick, loved contact. He abhorred contact. So I played football, basketball, baseball, and was fortunate to rise to the top in all those.
How were your classes?
Classes were terrific. By the time, even before I got out of elementary, I had a teacher or two who took me under their wing. I don't know why me and not Frankie, and then that seemed to continue with both teachers and coaches, that I had advocates. And boy, that's the main message of my book, is that if you can get a good adult advocate or two, it doesn't matter what adversity you're facing, you can come out of it stronger. But Frankie didn't have that same support. So the teachers all the way through, Mr. Bickley, my science teacher, Mr. Fisher, my German teacher, who then became president of the school through 1990, just outstanding people that really got me squared away for life.
When you were a little kid, 4, 5, 6 years old, who looked out for you? No
one, really. I mean, you had to look out for yourself. I happened to have good house parents. This was a married couple at the elementary school level. My house parents would not be so great at the junior high and senior high level when I went out to the farm. So I shouldn't say no one looked out for me, because I was extremely fortunate, as was Frankie, to have very nurturing house parents from K to 5.
Were there kids who just couldn't handle that, who needed somebody to keep a close eye on them?
Yeah, we were pretty energized, and we're coming from difficult circumstances in most cases, so we had a lot of energy to burn and not all in the right direction. So yeah, and the basic rule of thumb, I talk about the regimentation in there, that the institutional model was to have everybody doing the same thing pretty much all the time, and everybody in their place, knowing exactly where to be, what to be doing, and when to be doing it. And that kind of grated on me over time and a lot of the kids, because it's mind-numbing to be institutionalized, from age 4 on.
Were there kids who just rebelled against it and there were constant behavioral problems?
Sure, yeah. There were some kids who were creative delinquents, I call them, and they did well because they didn't quite go over the line. In fact, sometimes they were liked by the adults because they had a lot of spark and ingenuity, right? But there were then a number of kids, of course, who would push it too far, whether it was physical abuse, whether it was running away, whether it was stealing or something serious, and then they would be removed.
Did you have many
expelled
of those runaways?
I'd say a good half of the kids ran away at one time. My brother and I did. We got a block and we were terrified and came back.
It was possible to get expelled from there?
Yes. Yeah, it was very clear. Now, when I was there, all of us children were still indentured to the school. We were legally owned in a sense by Mr. Hershey and the Board of Managers, a practice that continued, I think, until about the early 50s. And so it says right in there that at any time, the Board of Managers could remove a child without question.
Did you have free time?
There wasn't a lot of free time, because free time and the devil's workshop, however that goes, and so we'd try to invent it. Like, I signed up for trapping. That looked like free time. It meant I had to get up at 4 a.m. instead of 5:15 to go check the traps. But at least you were out without supervision. And that was pretty important. And we all talked about ways of going over the wall. That didn't mean necessarily to run away, but to get an extra park privilege, to go into Hershey Park, or to do something where you weren't being watched.
So you couldn't just kind of stroll into town and visit the soda shop?
No, you'd have to be on an assigned privilege, and you'd have to sign out, sign back in, usually get transportation, usually couldn't walk, though we did sometimes.
Did you have possessions? Like, could you have your own toys or your own books or things like that?
You could. That was a tricky matter in its own right, because some kids would get better stuff. You weren't allowed to have much in the way of clothing, because that had to always be alike. It was always institutional. So we were recognized when we went into town, and the Hershey public school kids would say, "Here come the cows," and we'd get into a fight.
Oh, really?
Oh, there was a lot of rough and tumble.
What were your clothes like?
They were nice. Mr. Hershey says right in his deed he didn't want us to wear uniforms, so they were all, in a sense, sort of different, but they're from the same manufacturer and the same style. So they were khakis and kind of, a semi-sport shirt kind of thing. But we had our barn clothes, our school clothes, our house shoes, because you could never come in from the outside and not put your house slippers on. And then we had our Sunday best.
Was Milton Hershey alive during the time you were there at all?
No, unfortunately, I missed that honor. He died in 1945. Frankie and I came to the school in 47, so we just missed. But we would hear about him every week, almost. I mean, and the school to this day honors him practically, certainly every month.
What happened on holidays, or like Christmas or summer break? What'd you do?
Well, for a while, there was only visiting privileges on weekends, and you could have day privileges if relatives came. Frankie and I never had anyone come. Then they started allowing you to go for a week and then 2 weeks in the summer back wherever home was. And Frankie and I at first didn't have anyone. And then we started having relatives from Snowshoe come down, and that was the ultimate going over the wall, legally, to get away. But I remember, as nice as that was, in the beginning, the absence of that, to watch the other kids get picked up, to look out the window pane, and Frankie and I'd even pack our little suitcase, and no one ever come, and then we'd have to drag it back upstairs.
The school was open 12 months a year?
12 months, every day, still is. Always will be, I think.
I want to ask you about a letter that Frankie and Johnny, you and your brother, wrote to your grandmother. It says, "This is a scary, dangerous place. The older big boys pick on us and make us their slaves. They make us do their ironing, shoe shining, and other chores. They make fun of us and sometimes even beat us up. The house parents don't stop them and don't even seem to care about us." Was this typical, or was this written at a particularly bad time?
Well, the timing is important because that's junior high. So when kids, if they were going to be bullied, and there were some farm homes where there were very good house parents and good seniors, the big guys, who didn't do much bullying. Most cases, they still made the little guys do their chores, or their little gophers. But this was junior high, so I would have been in 6th grade, and I was 10 years old. Frankie would be in 8th, and he was 12 years old. So it was in that period of time that we would write every day to our poor little grandmother, and our mother was one of 13 kids. And a wonderful family. But I look back and I feel terrible about making her feel so bad, because she had to love us a lot to let us go and come to this place. But at that time we couldn't see it that way, and Frankie especially needed to get out.
Why did he need to get out?
Because he was being bullied a lot. He was not a kid who would stand up for himself. And that was taking a toll on him. He wasn't popular. He had been in a car accident on the way to Snowshoe a year earlier and had gone through the windshield. We don't know how much that contributed to his demise, but he was going downhill. He couldn't stay with the program because he'd be scared of being bullied. He wanted to be liked, and he wasn't. Didn't seem to have the same kind of mentors, teachers, and he wasn't an athlete, so he didn't have any coaches. So for him, it probably was a living hell at the time.
Was this book difficult for you to write, to rehash all this, or is it stuff you'd sooner put behind you?
More the latter. More of it, I would say, was cathartic. It was a little hard getting started, but when I got in it, it's almost like I needed to keep expressing some of those memories that I hadn't even thought about, and I sort of kept the Homeguys silence even when I went on to college and stuff. I wouldn't tell most of the people, maybe a best friend or something. My first wife remarked that she didn't know much about what she read in the book. My current bride, Gail, does, thank God. But so this was very healthy, I think, to get this expressed.
What do you mean by home guy?
That's what we were called. At first, we did consider this our home. We might have had a love-hate with it, but it was our home, especially after a few years there. And so we were the Homeguys. It was all just male. It was a pretty high testosterone place, you can imagine.
When did they start allowing girls?
That occurred, see if I get my math right, I think in the late, in the mid to late 70s.
So you were long gone by
well
then?
Gone by then. And I made the mistake of going to Princeton, which was all male. I don't mean mistake. I love Princeton. I am such a Princeton tiger through and through. But
and it was all white by the will by Milton Hershey School?
That's correct. Yeah, it was white male orphans between the ages of 4 and 15, I believe.
How'd they go about changing that?
Well, clearly the social pressures, social and legal pressures were beginning to mount, and the school was, I think, sage enough to see that this would be a good thing for the school in any event. And so they had to go to the courts and get a cypre, a modification, to first admit minorities, and I think that was late 60s, and then to admit girls. In both cases, it made it such a better place. You know, richer, warmer, more diverse place, more nurturing.
But you also have now teenage boys and teenage girls living away from parents, which poses other problems.
Sure, there are challenges, all around, but that's a good one to have. And just a picture that I love to talk about. So when I came back we haven't talked about yet, but I'm back at the school, and I'm looking at this new kaleidoscope, rainbow of colors, especially in our elementary school. And they're black and white and yellow and brown, and they're colorblind. These kids have no idea that they're a different color. It doesn't matter. And the friendships that get developed there are just pure and deep.
Well, we talked about you being a little kid there, but what was high school like when you got to be the age of the people who bullied you when you were littler?
Yeah, high school for me, with the exception of now having lost my brother Frankie, and I go to see him now. He's at the Hollidaysburg State Hospital Asylum. I mean, that's a terrible place. Thank God they closed those. But except for that, now I'm hitting my stride in athletics. I have terrific teachers. My house parents aren't so good, but I'm away.
You have the same house parents for a year or for longer?
Typically, if everything worked out fine, you'd have the same house parents from 6th grade through 12. So from kindergarten to 5, and then you go to the farm home and you'd have the same. But I was moved once when they closed my farmhouse down. So I had 2 sets. Anyway, I can tell you more, but high school was just a great trip for me.
I have to ask you about something. Right toward the beginning, when you were 3 years old and you first arrived, you said, the first thing I noticed about the school was the sharp, lemony scent that hung in the broad hallways. Yeah. Are there times now when you smell a smell like that and you're immediately back there?
Absolutely, right away. I can get that kind of pine scent and that lemon feel on wood, and I'm right there. I'm right there at Fannie B. Memorial Elementary School.
You say in here you applied to, was it Princeton, Harvard, and 3?
Harvard, Cornell, and West Point.
That's aiming pretty high.
Well, it was, and when I was growing up, and you can imagine, we don't get out. So other than going to Snowshoe, I hadn't been out of the county. And so I'm pretty sure I hadn't heard of the Ivy League. And just through good fortune and the ability to run pretty fast with the football, that helped. But being number 1, 2 in my class, I started getting recruiting letters from places, and they included all big football schools. Because up till then, I was thinking, maybe I'd go to Slippery Rock or Lock Haven, I thought, great schools. I had teachers from there who thought the world of them. Maybe Penn State, if I got fortunate. And then I started hearing from these other places, and I said, I want the best education. I'm not that great an athlete. At least I didn't think so. And looked at all those schools, the 4, and was drawn by West Point because it was the same kind of place as Milton Hershey. But I then sort of caught myself and said, I don't want the same. And Princeton was really warm and family-like, and they really wanted me, and that's where I went.
How was your football team in high school?
We had, the most interesting dearth of success in the beginning, and then just enormous. It was the opposite kind of outcome. So sophomore year, we were supposed to be great. We weren't. Junior year, I happened in preseason to tackle our starting quarterback, and I break his arm. And suddenly I'm quarterback. I felt terrible about that, but but we didn't win a game. It was the first time, I think, in the history of the school that we didn't win one game. Now, we were playing the big schools here. We were playing, Central Dauphin and Lancaster and New York and Altoona and Bethlehem. And we just had 90 kids in our class, but we were tough. And then our senior year, it all started coming together because these same kids really beginning to gel, really into sacrifice, as one united group. And we started getting better and then started beating some of these big teams. And then at the end, we played Cedar Cliff, who was undefeated, 8 or 9-0, and we beat them for our last home game. And then we played Lancaster, who was ranked, I think, #1 in the state. And we went down to Lancaster and beat them to finish our career. So we went from the lowest of low in the pits to the real top of the pile.
Who was your coach?
Coach Bainey Boozer, who graduated from Columbia. And then I had a great backfield coach who had just come from Lock Haven. And he became a real mentor to me.
Did you keep in touch with him after you finished at Hershey?
I did, and would come back to see him a lot. End up being the head coach here for a while.
Now, you said in the book that traditionally when you graduated from high school, they'd give you $100 and pat you on the back and say...
Little suitcase, too.
Suitcase. And
yeah.
Say, catch you later.
Yeah.
Did that happen to you?
It did, and it was just the way of doing things. It was almost like the deed of trust was being interpreted literally, because it says something like that in there. And instead of thinking, wow, we've just invested, in Johnny's case, 14 years and a lot of assets. Let's kind of track him and help him out along the way. At that time, there was a Hershey Junior College. It was closed in the early 60s. A very unpopular move. And most of our graduates who went to college at all would go there.
Was it run by the school?
It was. And it was open also to the local public school graduates. And that was all paid for. If you went away, as maybe half a dozen of us did in my class, you had to pay for your own. Fortunately, I had full financial aid, as most of us did.
So only about a half a dozen out of your class of 90 went away to college?
Correct.
So that you had no fellow Milton Hershey School graduates with you at Princeton?
No, I don't know. I think there's maybe one other kid had ever gone to the Ivy League period. But
what was it like from such a structured environment suddenly to find yourself in an Ivy League college as a freshman?
Scary. I was untethered. I had never sort of made decisions for myself. I had never kept my own clock, right? Knowing where to be, when. That was all scheduled for you. And so it was almost a terrifying feeling of being that free from never having been. And fortunately, though, football happens in the fall, so I was immediately on the freshman football team. I got structure, I got immediate friends, coaches were supportive, so were some of the professors. So I was able to make it after getting on academic probation. I decided I'd be an engineer because the Russians had sent Sputnik up. And I realized I was terribly equipped.
Lousy grades in the beginning?
Oh, I went from never having anything but an A in high school to failing grades. And almost left Princeton, but the professor said, you don't need to leave, Johnny. You just need to find a major that you like.
Well, without stereotyping, Ivy League colleges sometimes have a student body that it was raised with a little more wealth than average.
Yeah.
Did you encounter that as a difficulty in getting accepted by some of the other kids at Princeton?
Not at all, and not that I knew what to expect. I hadn't even read Fitzgerald's, Other Side of Paradise or anything. But I started hearing that we were the real prep college of the North, and that I had instant friends, again, with my athletic buddies, but almost everybody I met there was kind and bright, witty, obviously very smart, but they played down their wealth. Occasionally I'd hear things like before Christmas or something around our table at the fraternity. Tiger Inn was where I was. I'd hear my classmates talk about going to Europe, you know, or down to St. Bart's or something, and I thought, I'm going up to see my home guy buddies up in Hershey, and maybe I'll have a couch to sleep on, you know.
Is that where you would go in holidays and
most often?
Summer
yeah.
break?
Come
Yeah.
right back here, just like I am tomorrow. This is our homecoming, and I like to. We kid about it seriously, though, that it's the only real, authentic homecoming, maybe in the country. The rest are school comings, right? We're coming home.
How many years has it been since you left Milton Hershey School?
I retired in 2009.
I mean, since you left as a student.
Oh, 61. So we've already had our 50th.
How many of those people have you kept in touch with?
I'd say a dozen on a regular basis, and maybe then more on a every other homecoming kind of basis, every other year.
When you decided that engineering was not for you, what field did you go
Went
into?
into psychology. I figure one thing that I loved is trying to understand people, figure out human nature. And I had a lot to figure out. I had my brother to figure out. I had my father, who, by the way, ends up still being alive. He is not dead, after all, to try to figure out. And so I was really drawn to this whole mystery of how people think.
How'd you do in that field?
And I thrived in that. That's for me. I loved it, especially when Princeton wanted my own opinion on exams and things. I had lots of opinions, and I'd put them out there.
How far into your education did you go? You went to Johns Hopkins?
Then I went to Hopkins and got a master's degree in education.
And they
there.
lost your transcript?
Oh, did you see that? Yeah, that was
That could be awkward.
So embarrassing, because here I am. This is when I'm being considered for the full-time position as president of the Milton Hershey School. So I've come full circle back there. From a 3-year-old, now I'm 60, and I'm being considered. And all of a sudden the headhunter says, I don't think you went to Johns Hopkins. They don't have no record of you. I've asked them. And I said, I don't think I just like fantasized that year and those people and those courses. So I looked, and sure enough, they had lost it, I guess, when they converted from manual to internet. And then I found my diploma in the attic after a long search and so on. But it felt weird having to prove what obviously now has occurred.
So you got a master's degree from Hopkins?
Yes, in education.
And did you go further from that, or did you launch your career at that point?
I launched it. I had already done some teaching before then. That was the interesting story of, I applied to a job at Princeton for admissions. But in the meantime, Milton Hershey officials call me up and say, Johnny, would you like to come back and teach at Coach at your old home? And I said, I'd love it. There's nothing more. I'll be up there tomorrow if I can. And I responded to the offer letter with a letter of my own saying, can we even move up the start date? I was so excited. The ultimate honor to go back. And
How old were you then?
I would have been about 26, maybe, 25, 26. And I said at the end here, a few areas where I think I can even personally help out with the school. And 3 days later, I got a letter of rescission back, of declining the offer, because I had thought that I had mentioned some areas where I thought the school could improve.
They took affront at that?
Institutions tend to, and Milton Hershey is very closed in that regard. One of the reasons people don't know about it is because they're so secretive and closed down.
You had a career as a coaching executive managers?
Yes, so...
How'd you get yourself in that position?
Well, again, I love the whole notion of how people tick. And I had done some work in teaching, and I had done some work in coaching and in educational research in Washington. And then I realized I want to do something that is far more challenging and a little bit scary. And I thought about what could I do? And I thought about coaching. Coaching not sports, but people around leadership. And I was going to do it for educators because I knew the education world somewhat. And then one day I happened to be actually in Africa, and I was climbing Kilimanjaro, and I got the idea of, no, make it even tougher than that. Challenge yourself. And I said, okay, then I'm going to work with the top executives in Fortune 500 companies. Now, I didn't know how I'd do that. I was too young to do that. I didn't have the expertise to do that. But I decided that's where I could make the most difference. And so I went 0 for 62 on calling these corporations. It was a 63rd, happened to be Smith Barney. And the training director there looked at me and said, Johnny, I'm not sure I fully understand what you're offering here, but I think we want some of it. And I was in, and then the business exploded from there.
At what point did you look at Milton Hershey School and think there's trouble there, I gotta get back involved?
Yeah, really that started to happen right around 1990. That was the time when Bill Fisher, my old German teacher, was president, and he's outstanding, solid as a limestone boulder here. And the board at that time, and the board is all powerful at Milton Hershey, the governance there is an issue because it has absolute control and authority and isn't really accountable to anyone. They decided that the school model wasn't the best it could be, and they thought they had a better way of structuring the school than Mr. Hershey, the founder, did. And that meant essentially taking less needy kids who were better off, kids who had better track records, and it started to become a little more of a middle-class prep school. So they let Mr. Fisher, President Fisher, go and brought in some presidents who started to do that. The alumni then, and we're very difficult to rile because we're very loyal and we're deferential to our school. It's our alma mater, our alma pater, our home, our everything. But by that time we got riled up because the school was being taken off its mission. And so I helped to lead that, I guess you'd call it certainly a protest, maybe even a revolution in the mid-90s. And it sort of all came to a fruition in 2002 when the then current trust board, decided to put the Hershey Company for sale on the block. Then the community rose up to join us in wanting to get the board reformed.
Does the Alumni Association have clout, or is it an informal thing?
Not legal clout. I mean, we do have personal clout because we are the beneficiaries, but we've never been able to get legal standing. We've attempted that, and it's failed. And so that's why through the early 90s all the way to 2000, all of our protests weren't really going anywhere. 60 Minutes finally did a piece, but it was kind of a powder puff piece on the school and didn't add much. And so I'm not sure we'd have ever gotten this reform if the board hadn't put the company on the block.
Why'd they want to sell the candy company?
Actually, the story is that they didn't, but that the Attorney General at the time, that would be Attorney General Fisher, and his office was pushing them behind the scenes to sell it, that there needed to be more diversification, and I understand that. I think it's an important thing to do. And so the board went down that path. And then I think the Attorney General decided about that same time to run for governor. And with the uproar, he thought maybe it wasn't a good thing to sell the company, and they pulled it off the block.
You write in the book about how the boards of the HERCO, the Park and the Recreation, Entertainment and Recreation, and the Candy Company and the school were all kind of intertwined?
Yeah, it's a little tricky to understand, but at the very top, the umbrella is the Milton Hershey School Trust, if you think of it. Those people, those board members, also populate this same group, populate a thing called the Milton Hershey School Board of Managers that oversees the operation of the school. But the umbrella, the Milton Hershey School Trust, owns 100% of Hershey Entertainment, the park, golf clubs, the hotel, and so on. And they own 70% voting share of the Hershey Company.
And is there a problem with them sitting on boards of multiple levels of this?
I think there is. Up until, I guess, even around this 90 period, the board members who did that were so devoted to Mr. Hershey, they even probably knew him, a lot of them. And I think the commitment to serve in this sacred capacity was so deep and pure that they didn't want to take compensation. It wasn't an issue. They knew the focus was all about the school. A couple generations later, board members aren't connected so much with Mr. Hershey. There's absolute power, and there's the ability to name your own compensation. And so some started to do that and increased it. Then they appointed themselves to other entities, which then quadrupled their compensation to the point that there's an enormous amount of money being paid to board members. And that doesn't happen in charitable schools.
I want to read you something about the Philadelphia Inquirer did some articles that hung out a lot of dirty laundry. They reported that board members worked an average of 5 hours a week. They stayed for free at lavishly renovated Hotel Hershey and enjoyed free rounds of golf at Wren Dale Golf Club, which they had bought with school money. The board paid $12 million for the club, more than twice its appraised value, and spent more than $4 million to renovate the clubhouse. And you say this all took place at a time when the board had shelved our commitment to increase enrollment to 2,000 students, ostensibly because of the bad economy and reduced trust revenues.
Mm-hmm.
Anything come out of those Inquirer articles?
I think it heightened the knowledge, at least in Philly and in Hershey, about the dangers of an all-powerful, no check and balance board. It didn't really create any reform. There was an Attorney General investigation at the time that was just allowing to lapse. And then Attorney General Kane came in and had the opportunity to do something. A few things were done, but not much in most people's view. To me, the issue is one of absolute power and money. That if you're going to have total authority for a place that has the assets that the school has of $12 billion and all that implies, I think there needs to be such a high moral sense of self-discipline because there are no checks and balances. And part of that would be taking little to no compensation. And the board didn't take any compensation until about 92, I think. And it would call for transparency, that the board operates to a large degree in secret, in executive session. Most of the things they do aren't known unless they have to be reported by federal law.
Is it almost a problem that the trust is so big? I mean, $12 billion for a school?
I think certainly size itself is a huge challenge. There isn't any question. I think what complicates it is when you take it from the mission is all about the school. If you read the deed of trust, Mr. Hershey's left everything for the kids and for the school. And if the focus stayed right there, it'd be fine. But suddenly then you have a Fortune 500 company sitting here. You have this enormous Hershey recreation operation. You even have some of the community foundation involved and so on. And now, if people especially sit on interlocking boards like that, and are not transparent about their operation, there isn't any way to know what's going on. And the focus then tends to move away from the kids.
You also say in here at one point the school's accreditation was being challenged. Was the education, quality of education, not what it should have been?
I always thought it was good. One thing I want to make sure I say is that Mr. Hershey founded the school as the Hershey Industrial School, and it was built on a shop model, and it was the finest vocational school in the world, I bet. The shops and the teaching and the apprenticeships, our kids learned crafts and vocations, and employers would line up in the spring to get our graduates. I mean, we were that well trained and had great work ethic, because character development came first at Milton Hershey. So employers wanted those kids. Well, at some point, when college became so important for future success, we migrated away from the vocation programs, but kept some of them. So I think the education along the way for its time has been very good. It's not high-powered the way an Exeter, Lawrenceville, Andover would be, because we're taking kids who come from way back, academically, emotionally, otherwise.
I don't want to interrupt you, but we only have a few minutes left. I have to ask you about how you became president of the school.
Yes, so to
How'd that
me,
happen?
that's a miracle, because I had learned earlier on from my example when I had gotten accepted for that post, that you can't dissent and still get in the big tent. And here I was helping to lead the alumni revolution. I had a high-profile dissenting role going on here, but when the smoke cleared and the board was required to be reconstituted, that came through the Attorney General and the Orphans Court. They also were then retiring the president, and they needed someone quickly. And alumni and other folks who knew me said I'd be a good candidate, so I was one of those considered. I was shocked, and I didn't think I had a chance. But they wanted to move pretty quickly, and I said I'd be willing to drop my business even and be up there tomorrow if I could, if you need me. And it wasn't tomorrow, it was 2 weeks that I was then in as the acting president. They went through this almost a year-long search for the permanent, and I was really honored to get that post as well. And then I had 7 best years of my entire career helping to bring the school back on its mission, get back the strong character development. We grew the school enrollment by 50%. We got the whole campus ready for the next 100 years. It was just wonderful.
So when you came in as president, were you able to institute the kind of changes you thought were needed, or was there kind of a resistance to change?
Well, there was not much resistance from the new board, because they wanted peace, among other things. They wanted, with the alumni, they wanted to have a semblance of stability, and I could bring that. And morale was really low, and so on. And so most of the staff and the kids, for sure, wanted to make this a special place again, with lots of pride, lots of great success stories. So we had a lot of help, but institutions by themselves, by definition, resist change. And so a lot of people thought I was going way too fast. And I said, well, Mr. Hershey, he built this chocolate factory in the middle of a cornfield. Well, he built the entire community around it. And then he brought in all the trolleys, for the transportation. And then he built all these other buildings. And then he invented the world's best chocolate, cheapest chocolate bar. And he did that all the same time. I think we could do this. He did this on the same soil, I said. And so, I think we have the capacity. I say Milton Hershey School is one of the few places in the world where the mission, the sacred mission, and the inordinate resources combine.
At what point did you think your job was done and it was okay to step away from it?
It's a tough subjective definition, but I felt I needed to get the culture right. And that's what I did with corporations, if you think about it. And I thought the morale is up, the work ethic is back, we're being more accountable, there's less entitlement. Those were big things we were fighting. We've grown the school by 50%. We know we can do that. We've got back to enrolling the neediest, most alone, most vulnerable kids. And we've done this now for a good 4 to 5 years once we got it established. I said, and it was the start of the second century. I said, it's a good time to turn it over.
Are you still involved with the school?
A little bit, certainly with my friends up there, for sure. I probably still have a little bit of some tension with the board, but I accept that as part of the package.
What's the future of the school? What's the second 100 years going to be like?
That is such a great question, because the model at 2,000, maybe 2,300 max, is probably going to, this current model kind of peaks out, and we still have all these resources, money, land, other things. And so the question will be, what alternative models are we willing to come up with? Because the deed's pretty restrictive. Institutions tend to be a little, restrictive in their thinking. But that's the big question, because we could serve a lot more needy children with the resources we have, but we'll have to get resourceful and courageous.
Well, we're going to have to stop there because we're out of time. We've been speaking with John O Brien. He's the author of this book, Semisweet, An Orphan's Journey Through the School That Hershey's Built. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Brian.
You've been listening to a podcast of PA Books, a production of PCN, the Pennsylvania Cable Network. We'd like to hear from you. Our email address is pabooks@pcntv.com. Like us on Facebook to learn more about PA Books.